You feel anger. But this anger isn't from now. It doesn't begin when you're cut off in traffic, nor when someone doesn't understand you. This anger has much deeper roots. And the most intriguing part is that it isn't entirely yours. It belongs to someone you once were, and who was never defended. There's something almost no one realizes about anger. It's a living memory. A scream that was never heard. A cry for help silenced for years. And that now echoes in ways we don't always understand. Carl Jung said that everything we do not face in childhood returns in our adult life as destiny. And maybe your anger is precisely the echo of a forgotten child who just wanted to be protected, but no one showed up. In this video, we will dive into this invisible and often neglected territory of the psyche, the exact point where pain and self-defense blur, where what we call anger is, in truth, the purest form of unrecognized despair. But be careful. The answer you're looking for isn't where you expect it, and what comes next may completely change the way you see your emotions. What we do not face within ourselves, we will meet as fate. Carl Jung. There is a silent moment in every person's life when something inside breaks. It's not visible, it's not immediate, but it is definitive. Anger, this explosive and sometimes uncontrollable force, rarely arises from what's happening now. It's a delayed scream, an ancient protest, coming from a wound that never healed. And behind every explosion, there is pain that was ignored for far too long. Imagine a small child cornered, crying in a corner because no one defended her. She doesn't understand the world. She only feels. And what she feels is abandonment, injustice, fear. But since she doesn't know how to name any of it, she keeps it inside. And that build-up becomes something. It becomes tension. It becomes anger. What few understand is that anger, in its essence, is a mechanism of emotional self-defense. It's the body saying, enough, I can't stand being hurt anymore. But since we weren't taught to embrace pain, we choose anger because it seems stronger, because it protects what has already been hurt too much. And this is where everything changes. Because instead of seeing anger as the villain, we can begin to see it as the messenger. It's not against you, it's for you. It screams where you once only stayed silent. And the more we ignore this signal, the louder it becomes, until we can no longer control it. But there's one detail that changes everything. The encounter with the unconscious is always an encounter with something that disturbs us. Carl Jung. If we look closely, we'll see that behind the anger, there is sadness, a deep and lonely sadness. Anger is the mask we use to hide the vulnerability we weren't allowed to feel, because feeling was dangerous. It meant being weak. It meant being ignored again. And so, like an emotional armor, anger fits in. It offers control when everything around seems to slip through our hands. But this control is illusory, because what we really want is to be heard, seen, loved. Emotional healing begins when you dare to listen to what the anger is trying to say. And it always says something like, I was hurt, and no one saw it. In that moment, the child living in you reveals herself, and with her, the opportunity to finally embrace what was once left behind. This leads us to something even deeper. The child who is not embraced by love will become the adult who unconsciously seeks it in everything they do. Carl Jung. There's a kind of silence. That doesn't come from peace, but from absence. The absence of a gaze that welcomes, of a word that comforts, of a presence that says, even in silence, I'm here with you. In childhood, everything is felt in immense proportions. Time seems longer, pain more intense, and abandonment, even if not physical, leaves marks that time does not erase, Because it's not just about who left, but about who stayed and didn't see. How many times does a child cry and no one truly listens? How many times does she try to explain but gets interrupted, corrected, ignored? Emotional abandonment is subtle. It doesn't scream. It settles in slowly, like a shadow. And when we realise it, it has already shaped the way we see ourselves. And that's where injustice comes in. Because from the child's point of view, everything feels personal. If something goes wrong, she believes it's her fault. If she doesn't receive affection, she believes she doesn't deserve it. The child has no way of understanding that the adults around her are wounded too, so she carries the weight of rejection on her own shoulders. What few people realise is that this pain shapes our relationships in adult life. We keep searching in others for what we lacked back then: validation, safety, belonging. But since we don't know that's what we're doing, we get frustrated, we get hurt, and we feel wronged all over again. And this wound screams. It shows up in unbalanced relationships, emotional outbursts, and a constant sense that something's missing because something was missing. And inside us, there's still a child waiting for someone to come back and say, "I see you, and what you felt was real." But are we capable of giving that child what she never had? Can we become the adult she needed back then? This leads us to a painful, yet necessary revelation. We are not what happened to us. We are what we choose to become with what happened. Carl Jung. Because inside many strong women still lives a little girl crying for justice, still carrying the weight of having been ignored when she needed someone the most. And what we're about to see is how that girl is still alive, shaping the woman you are today. Nothing influences a woman's psychic environment more strongly than the girl she once was. Carl Jung. There is a woman who smiles on the outside, but inside is still screaming. She became strong, independent, determined. But sometimes that strength carries exhaustion, because it wasn't born from lightness. It was born from necessity, from the urgency of emotional survival, from the pain of not being protected when she was just a girl. On the outside, she says everything is fine. On the inside, she still holds memories no one ever validated, words she heard and never forgot. Situations where she silently begged for someone to say, "This is unfair to you." But the world around her didn't see or didn't want to, so she learned to defend herself, even without knowing how. What few understand is that the revolt she feels, that constant anger, that irritation over small things, isn't about the present. It's about what got stuck back then. It's the wounded girl trying to speak through the adult woman, trying to show that it still hurts, that she's still there. And it shows up in so many ways. In relationships where she can't trust, in spaces where she feels she constantly has to prove her worth, in decisions where the fear of making mistakes paralyzes her. The anger becomes armor, but it's a heavy armor, one that prevents her from feeling light, whole, and connected to herself. But there's something even deeper. Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to a better understanding of ourselves. Carl Jung. This woman often gets irritated by other people's emotional dependence, by their neediness, by the drama. But deep down, it's because those behaviours touch precisely the wound she no longer wants to face. The girl who was once needy too, who also needed and didn't get. That's why emotional healing isn't about erasing the past, but about embracing yourself with the maturity no one ever offered you. Because as long as the girl remains voiceless, the woman will remain angry. As long as the pain isn't heard, It will scream through irritation, impatience, and emotional disconnection. But there's one detail that changes everything. What we deny in ourselves, we meet as fate. Carl Jung. And maybe this revolt could be the beginning of something new, a bridge, a calling, because every repressed emotion carries a hidden invitation, the invitation to look within and finally take care of yourself. What we do not face within will emerge as destiny in our outer life. Carl Jung. Angi Marmi, which for so long seemed like an enemy, might actually be a lighthouse. It shows what hurt. It reveals where abandonment still lives. But what do we do with such intense visceral energy? Repressing it doesn't work. We've already tried that. Exploding doesn't help either. It only causes more pain. What's left then is transformation. And it's at this point that anger can become an act of self-care. Because when we listen to what it's trying to say, we can redirect its power. It stops being destructive and becomes protective. It begins to say enough. Not to the world, but to everything that once wounded you from the inside. Transforming anger into self-care is like rediscovering your body and your story. It's looking at the pain and saying, I'll take care of you now. It's understanding that the scream coming from within no longer needs to be silenced, but embraced with presence, with listening, with truth. And curiously, it's in this moment that emotional healing begins to bloom, because anger stops being a raging fire and becomes warmth, a warmth that softens the heart, that protects without wounding, that sets boundaries without violence, a warmth that says, I respect myself. But there's one detail that changes everything. Where love reigns, there is no will to power, and where power predominates, love is lacking. Carl Jung. When we use anger as self-care, we stop fighting against the world and begin to protect ourselves within it. We create safe spaces, we say no without guilt. We choose healthier relationships. We relearn how to breathe. We relearn how to live. And all of this begins the moment we stop seeing anger as a monster and start recognizing it as a sacred messenger, a reminder that there is still a child inside us who just wants to be cared for. This leads us to something even deeper. The soul needs security just as the body needs shelter. Carl Jung. There's a kind of strength that doesn't come from shouting or resistance. It's a quiet strength, steady, invisible to the eyes but deeply felt in the heart. It's the strength of emotional self-defense, the one that arises when we decide we will no longer be the backdrop for the same old wounds. For a long time, we were taught to endure, to tolerate, to silently accept what hurts us, afraid of seeming weak, selfish, or overly sensitive. But what few know is that saying no can be the most sacred act of self-love there is. Because protecting yourself is also an act of emotional healing. Emotional self-defense is not about rejecting the other. It's about including yourself in your choices. It's about clearly recognizing when a conversation wounds, when a presence drains, when a behavior can no longer be tolerated. It's looking at yourself and saying, I matter to me. And it's in that internal space that anger finds a new purpose. It stops being just a reaction and becomes direction. It starts pointing to where boundaries are needed, where distance is necessary, where standing your ground is vital. And all of this without losing connection to who you are. What few people understand is that emotional self-defense is not harshness. It's maturity. It's not rigidity. It's self-love. It's the wisdom of someone who knows their wounds and therefore doesn't expose them to just anyone. It's the intelligence of someone who's been hurt and chooses not to repeat the same story. But are we truly ready to accept this? One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. Carl Jung. Accepting that we have the right to protect ourselves is breaking through centuries of silence. It's interrupting cycles that repeat from generation to generation. It's giving voice to the forgotten child within us, saying, "Now no one will hurt you anymore, because I'm here." And when this truth settles in, everything changes. The anger dissolves, the pain quiets, the soul finally finds rest. For so long, you tried to control the anger, you thought it was the problem. You tried to silence it, hide it, even blamed yourself for feeling it. But the truth is, anger was never the enemy. It was always there, trying to protect the most vulnerable part of you. The child no one defended, with every outburst, every tension in your body, every word swallowed. It was her trying to say, "I'm still here." Anger is not just a symptom, it's a request, a plea from someone who's been forgotten for too long, and now just wants to exist. And then it all makes sense. That anger that seemed over the top was just unvalidated pain. That exhaustion from difficult relationships was the fatigue of never being truly understood. Every defensive gesture was the silent cry of someone who had to fight for her own dignity, even if no one ever taught her how. In the end, the answer was always there, hidden in the oldest memories, in childhood silences, in the moments when you had to be strong, when all you really wanted was to be held. Now the question is no longer, how do I control my anger? But, am I ready to embrace who I once was, with everything I felt? Because only when the wounded child meets the gaze of the adult you've become, does true healing begin. But are we truly ready to accept that? This journey wasn't really about anger, it was about reunion. A reunion with the part of you that screamed in silence for so many years, that was ignored, invalidated, punished for feeling, but never truly welcomed. When you realise that your anger belongs to the child no one protected, something deep begins to shift, because you stop fighting your emotions and start listening to them. You stop seeing yourself as someone difficult and begin to recognise yourself as someone who survived the unbearable. And that is a turning point. It's when you become the adult the little girl needed, the one who doesn't ignore her pain, who doesn't minimise her emotions, who offers exactly what was missing: protection, respect, presence. If this content brought valuable insights to you, don't let the learning stop here. Start applying these ideas in your life and see how your perception of yourself can begin to transform. Now tell me in the comments, which part of this journey resonated with you the most? Or if you're already on this path of emotional healing, share your experience. Your story might be exactly what someone else needs to read in order to begin their own transformation. And if you'd like to dive even deeper into this universe, up here there's a recommended video that can expand your understanding even more of what lives inside you. See you in the next video.